We will be going over two sections today, which is going to be your directed writing task, which is section A, as well as the composition section, which is going to comprise of descriptive as well as narrative writing. Okay, so we'll go over both. However, we will start off with section A today, which is going to be your directed writing task. So the paper in reference that we will talk about is going to be the October-November 2024 paper, which will actually be the 2-1 variant. There's an article writing task in there, which is what we will use as our point of reference for today's session. Okay, so let's start off. For all those who just joined in, I would suggest please download the paper. It's in the chat. It's October-November 2024, variant 2-1. So I will have it on my screen as well. We will start off with a basic evaluation section where we'll talk about all the various formats that are incorporated within your directed writing task, followed by one sample question, जो कि होगा आपका 2024 का paper, followed by a little discussion on composition, which is narrative and descriptive, and the common errors that students are making. So I'll go over both sections today. All right, so if you have any questions, you can add them to the chat. All right, so first things first, the most important thing that I want to talk about today is what the directed writing section actually is about and how students tend to confuse the idea of directed writing with what is expected by the examiner for this response. All right, so when we talk about directed writing, a lot of students end up confusing the idea with just producing a response that is an article or a speech or a letter. That is not the task at hand. There are certain directions that the examiner has shared with you in the form of the question, and those directions are what you're expected to actually follow. All right. So the first thing that you need to actually do is identify what these directions are. And these directions will always be present within your question. So when we talk about these directions, identifying these directions, these are three things that you need to identify. Number one, the type of text you're expected to produce as a response, जिसको generally आप format कहते हो. So the format of your response is basically the type of text your response should be. It could be an article or an email, a letter or a speech or a report. All of that matters because you will decide what to write and how to write based on this type of text. So the first thing that you need to identify is what type of text is the examiner asking for. Once that is out of the way, the next thing that you identify is your audience. Who am I writing for? This again will be given within the question as your audience or whoever this response is supposed to address. If it's a letter, they'll probably ask you to write a letter to the principal or an individual in authority if it's a formal letter. If it's an informal letter, they might ask you to write to a relative, a friend, a cousin, an acquaintance, a class fellow, someone you know on a personal level. Iske alawa, we might have audiences such as a group, which could be for a speech or an article, in which case they will specify what the background of this audience is going to be like. So this group will be a dynamic in terms of a specific age group or a background. Could be students, could be a collective audience within a school, could be an audience of general public, जो कि newspaper article होता है. So in these regards, you have to keep in mind who your audience is. All right. So keep in mind that all responses have to be in reference to the specific audience at hand. The third thing that you identify is your purpose, the purpose of your response. Are you writing to convince someone of an idea? Are you writing to share information regarding an idea, or doing both? The questions that we have seen so far have that one bullet point that asks for your opinion. So eventually this does become a persuasive piece of text. So eventually you are persuading your audience on your particular opinion. All right. So these are the first three things that you identify from within the question. All right. So I will go about this step by step. So I will keep transitioning between these slides and the paper. So make sure you have the paper in front of you. Now that you know all of these things, these three things that we need to identify, I'm going to switch to the paper, which is the October-November 2024 variant 2.1. That's what we're using as a point of reference. So now I told you 3 things that we need to identify. I'm going to jump to the question, which is where I am going to identify all of these 3 things. So the first thing that you need to do is look at your question and identify your audience, identify the purpose of your task, and identify what kind of question or what kind of response your examiner actually wants. So I've highlighted those for you. The first thing that we have in front of us is that you have read 2 texts about the impact of social media on young people, and you have been asked to write an article for your school magazine, giving your own views on the advantages and disadvantages of social media for young people. So they've already told you that your audience is a group of young individuals. The medium or the type of text is an article for a school magazine. So that's number 2. And the purpose here is to give our views regarding the advantages and disadvantages of social media on young people. Now, all 3 things that I just talked about have been identified or highlighted on this question, because that's going to be your first step. The first thing you're going to do is identify these 3 things. All right? Once this is out of the way, the next thing that we look at is the 2 bullet points. The first one, which says evaluate the ideas and opinion in both texts. This is the one that students find the most confusing or the most difficult or have trouble because of the word evaluation. All right, so this is something that everybody finds confusing. So I am going to simply replace this word with development. Agar evaluation is a word that is not something that's clear for you or something that you don't understand, let's replace this word with development, because that's what evaluation actually means. You pick an idea and then you try and develop it. You try to develop your own thoughts. You try to come up with examples or any supporting ideas in favor or against that particular point that you have read. So each and every single one of the questions, the tasks, the ideas given within the text will be evaluated, will be developed based on what you understand. All right. So I am going to give everyone 5 minutes to simply go over these 2 texts. So just quickly skim through so that you understand what each of these texts are about. So I'm going to leave them on my screen for 2 minutes. I want you all to read these, and I want you all to see what you understand, or if you're able to just comprehend what this text is about. So everyone has 5 minutes, quickly skim through. All right, now that you've all skimmed through the text, the next task at hand is to look at this one little thing over here. The first thing that we identify or notice when we look at text A and text B is that they've given us these two pieces of information, which is basically meant to give you a little bit of perspective where these opinions are coming from. So you'll notice that both of these texts have an age written underneath. The only reason why they've given you these is because they want you to try and establish a little bit of a background or perspective of where these opinions are coming from. So where we have text A, which is written from the perspective of a 42-year-old individual, as well as text B, which is from the perspective of a 15-year-old individual. The reason why these are important is because this gives you a little bit of an idea of who is saying this. This part, however, I want you all to completely ignore. We do not care what these people's names are. So ignore them completely. It doesn't matter. It's just there for the sake of perspective. That's it. Okay? So all we're going to look at is the fact that we have two individuals, two very different perspectives that have been shared with us. All right? Which is an adult and a teenager. That's it. After that, once you've established that, move on. This is not something that's going to be focused on after that. Once you've established this perspective, move on. Now we have two texts in front of us, two opinions in front of us, 2 points of view in front of us. All right. Text A basically speaks of social media from the perspective of an individual who's 42 years old. So you will notice that there are certain hints focusing on how this is something that focuses on the idea of how parents perceive social media. All right. So I'll go over this paragraph by paragraph and I'll talk to you about how, as a student, I would evaluate these points or I would look at these points when I identify them for the sake of this question, where I am supposed to evaluate these two texts and then give my opinion in the form of an article. So I'm going to look at these. The first paragraph basically highlights how social media apps are very popular among young individuals, but should we allow our children to use them? As a parent, I am worried about the negative effects of social media can have on young people and don't let my children have a social media account. So the first thing that we will identify is the fact that this is from the perspective of a parent. Why does that matter? Why does it matter that these opinions, these factors that we have in front of us are from the perspective of a child or a teenager or, say, a parent? Why does that matter? Why do I care? Any perspective from an adult's opinion will obviously mean that they're speaking from experience, as opposed to a child, because they would be speaking from the only experience that they have, which would be limited. So in this case, if a parent thinks that social media accounts are not something their children should have, you as a student, as an individual reading this blog, you can actually evaluate this in both ways. So all those of you who agree that children, young individuals should not have a social media account, you will talk about how it's proven through science, it's proven through experience of our parents and our adults that it's not a good thing, it's not affecting us positively. On the other hand, agar aapne isko negate karna, you will say that we live in a day and age where young individuals need this technology in front of them or in their lives to be able to keep up. So all that I just said was my development, my thoughts on the fact that a parent thinks that a child should not have social media accounts. This is how you will take each and every single point and you will build your own perspective on that matter. Now, a lot of you may think that social media apps are beneficial for you because it's something that you personally believe that you are taking an advantage out of. So that perspective is going to help you negate the points that this parent says. Zaruri nahi hai that every single point is something that you will agree with or disagree with, and that's fine. As long as you develop it, as long as you give examples, as long as you give your own thoughts on each of these points, it will count as evaluation. Does not matter if it is in favor or against. Because again, you're developing your own views. So as I go on, that will be clarified. If you look at the second point, it says, these apps are designed to attract and keep users' interest. This means that hours can be lost looking at news feeds and videos, leaving important tasks like homework unfinished. Now, all those of you who believe that this holds true can actually elaborate on how you have come across or faced as a child, as a student, faced so many situations where you've wanted to or needed to complete a task, but weren't able to because that Instagram video was just too funny, or how your friends kept sending you reels and you had to look at them. You were just too distracted or so involved or so engrossed in those videos or those posts that you ended up losing valuable time that you could have used to finish your homework. Now, they've mentioned that you're wasting time on social media and not doing your homework. That point is there in the text. How will I develop it as a student? I'll give examples. I might include personal anecdotes to support it, or I might even talk about instances where looking at these videos helped me focus better on my homework because it gave me a little bit of a distraction, a little bit of a breather. So this again goes both ways. You can evaluate this positively and you can evaluate this negatively. Basically, any thought you associate with the point is your evaluation, is your development. So every point should have a thought, an idea, an example, either in favor or against, associated with it by the student. That is what the evaluation content point actually wants you to do. That first bullet point, this is what it's asking you to do. All right, I will go over how this has to be structured within a response paragraph-wise in a bit. Once we've evaluated all of these points, we'll talk about how this has to be divided into paragraphs then. So rest assured, we will go over that as well. The next point that they're talking about is the fact that a student might end up falling behind at school. All those of you who might agree with this will focus on the idea of how time is something so important for us students because we have a very limited amount of time that we have to spend on homework, on our school tasks, because we live in a very fast-paced world. So we have to focus on so many tasks in that limited amount of time that if we are going to end up procrastinating, like one of you just said, or focusing on all of these distractions, we will not have enough time to be productive. That is how I will speak in favor of this. However, I will also add in that some of you might believe that we end up actually, at par with the world around us because of social media. If I didn't have social media as a student, I will not know what's going on in the world. I will not know of the latest trends. I will not know of what my friends are talking about in recess. All of these things will be a question mark for me because I'm not on social media. So there may be so many students out there who believe that this is actually not true. We do not fall behind at school because of social media. We're actually able to keep up with school because of social media. So again, the same point can be evaluated both ways. If you want to look at this in favor as something that you agree with, then you will talk about how it's a distraction. If you want to look at this as something that you do not agree with, you may evaluate this further by saying that although a lot of adults believe that social media is causing children to fall behind or not able to keep up with the productive activities that they're supposed to be a part of, which is not true. As a child, as a student, as a young adult, I can assure you that it is because of social media that these children are able to keep up with the world around them, which is ever evolving. So इस तरह की statements आप use कर सकते हो to actually either counter the opinion by saying that I don't believe this, or by developing how there are certain examples that help you understand that yes, this is true. All right. Just keep in mind that directed writing is not a summary task. So your job isn't to rephrase and just copy paste what you've read. Once you've read these points, once you've got these ideas in your mind, you're not supposed to copy paste them or just, rephrase and just write in a different order and that's it. You're supposed to take that as a baseline thought and develop it further. So Again, someone just said copy pasting, please do not do that. All right, you're not expected to copy paste. You're actually expected to keep that idea as a baseline and then develop it further through examples, through other ideas and facts that you might be able to associate with it, or by even personal experiences that you think would be appropriate for that particular point. All right. So once you have done that for each and every single one of these points for text A, you will move on to text B. All right. So again, to clarify, yes, you can develop these points positively or negatively. That's completely up to you. So for this, for the sake of clarity, I am going to show you this slide one more time. Look at step 3. This is basically what evaluation means. You look at each and every single point that you have identified, and you ask yourself whether you agree with it or disagree with it. What it means to agree with a point means to add examples or your own further understanding of how true this point is. If you disagree with that particular point, for example, like I said, falling behind in school, I personally think, or my perspective on the point would be that no, it's not making students fall behind, it's actually helping them. So how will I bring that thought forward? I'll say that parents believe that it's holding students back, but in reality, if you ask any student, they'll tell you exactly how much social media is helping them remain engaged and in touch with the world around them. Because we live in a world that is dominated by technology, that is dominated by AI, that is dominated by the internet. And so all of these things are brought to that student through social media. And so they're able, so they're able to actually keep track of what's going on in the world around them. So I hope that makes sense. That a point can be agreed with or disagreed with based on what you believe. All right. So when they're saying you develop both points, you are basically focusing on each of the points and developing it either positively or negatively. Okay. So when you're highlighting the ideas of, say, the advantages, yes, you will talk about how there are certain positives associated with the idea of social media. Okay. Now, this question is actually very straightforward in this regard because उन्होंने directly आपसे कहा है that you are focusing on advantages and disadvantages. So it will be very easy for you to simply tackle all the advantages in one go, along with your own development for each of those advantages, along with a paragraph that highlights the disadvantages. However, you can still adopt the argumentative style where you mention an advantage and then counter it with a disadvantage, if that is a writing style you're more comfortable with. So again, both of these writing styles are correct. You can either talk about both points of view separately or use a counter argument method. They're both correct and they will both apply in this case. It depends on what you are comfortable writing. Okay, so a lot of students here have the confusion that, we're supposed to stick to one paragraph for advantages, one paragraph for disadvantages, and then one paragraph for our opinion. That is not incorrect. That is perfectly fine. You can do that. However, some students prefer writing an argumentative style, which is where they counter argue every point that they make, and then eventually conclude with one strong point that holds the argument together, whether in favor of advantages or disadvantages, जैसे आप लेके चल रहे हो argument को, and then they give their own perspective that this is why this stands and support it with an idea or two. That style of writing is better, of course, because obviously it shows a little more, you could say, depth. However, both are correct. So just rest assured, if you're used to that paragraph style of writing, that's fine. It's perfectly fine. So the examiner prefers a well-written response, a balanced response. So as long as your response tackles both ideas fairly, develops both ideas fairly, gives or shows that the student spent time with each of the points and developed them, you give your own ideas, you give your own examples or your counters, and then you give an opinion that is not negated by what you were saying earlier, but actually is within that flow, along with a support or two, the examiner will be happy with that. Okay, so there's no actual format that the examiner prefers. Obviously, if an article looks like an article, follows these 2 bullet points, does justice to the evaluated points, has good examples, has a good use of vocabulary and sentence structures, the examiner is happy. All right. So there's no preferred form of writing or style of writing. Obviously, it's about what you're comfortable with, because that is what you will be able to actually do justice towards. Okay. So a lot of students think that since there are 2 texts that we need to evaluate, and then there's an opinion that will obviously favor one of the 2, how do we go about the opinion paragraph as a whole? A good way to understand that would be that you are basically bringing forward all of this information in front of an audience. So initially, your purpose here is that you are going to focus on the idea that, yes, certain individuals believe advantages exists, certain individuals believe disadvantages exist. So I'm actually going to take one approach and try and highlight this. So for example, I've read both of these texts, and I hold the opinion that social media has more advantages, or is an advantageous thing for young people as opposed to something negative. All right. However, can any of you give me any reason why looking at a screen for hours on end can be a good thing? Can anyone support that? You probably cannot, because at the end of the day,
Can I say one thing?
yeah, sure, go ahead.
Can you say that spending hours on screen while studying from YouTube or any other resource on these apps will be useful?
Okay, so does that change the fact, or does that, so are your eyes going to decide not to be affected by this? And will your eyesight remain perfect after that?
Okay, that will
Just
be
because what you were looking at on the screen was actually helpful?
actually no, it will still affect
It will still
that.
affect your eyesight, isn't it? So
Yes.
there are certain drawbacks that we cannot negate. If I am looking at a screen, I am going to obviously damage my eyesight if I continuously look at a screen. So no matter what I'm looking at, no matter how useful that content is, I'm getting my homework done, my presentation is spot on now, and I get an A star in class. But that doesn't change the fact that I spent 4 hours on a screen, which did damage my eyesight to an extent, which did give me a headache afterwards. So if you look at text A, this is the side of the story that this individual is trying to highlight. So no matter what you want to say in your opinion, you will still mention the fact that, for example, इन्होंने जैसे ये कहा है that it is going to cause you to spend hours on a screen. And yes, it is going to have an impact on your health. So how do I mention this and still go on to mention my opinion that as a student, I believe that students should be given access to social media, because it is the only way connecting them to the world around them? How do I keep that opinion while making sure that this negative point that I just mentioned 5 minutes ago, 2 paragraphs ago, that it has an effect on my health? I will give a solution then. So this is where you can still mention that negative point without negating your own opinion. So I will say that as someone who cares about my health and cares about being able to progress and succeed in the world that I live in, I will not only encourage the use of social media, but also the awareness that screen time has to be limited regardless of what that screen time is being used for. Does that make sense now? That I will mention my opinion, I will favor social media, I will favor that screen time and how beneficial it is, and I will give a solution ताकि जो पहले मैंने negatives बताए थे from the perspective of a parent who will also be reading my article, because again, it's a school magazine. So that school magazine will go to a parent, will go to a teacher, and will go to the students. So I will write something that not only caters to those students, but also comes across as something that provides solutions for all of these mentioned negatives of social media for the parents and teachers.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
मेरी एक दोस्त है, वो वेटिंग रूम में, she's there for 20 minutes. आप प्लीज उसको अंदर एंटर कर सकते हैं?
All right, why don't you just give me a second? All right, I think everyone's in now. Okay, so
Yeah. Is it possible to acknowledge the point? Like, can we acknowledge it while saying that the other thing is more important? Like, this is true, however, this is more significant.
yes, we can. That's actually a good way to, that's what we call counter argument. So when you acknowledge a point, for example, saying that there are certain health issues associated with excessive use of social media, such as increased level of anxiety and stress that's seen in young individuals. So it is very important to remember that as long as this awareness exists, it is possible to avoid such drawbacks. So while I acknowledge the fact that, yes, there is a certain negative associated with this idea, there is one way that I can actually negate this by providing a solution. So as long as you acknowledge the fact that, yes, screen time will affect my eyes. So it's very important for me as a student to control how much time I spend on that screen. And once I've done that, not only did I acknowledge both texts, I also made sure that I provided an opinion with it. Does that make sense now? So you can definitely mention a point, acknowledge an idea, and side by side, provide either a counter or provide a solution or provide an opinion and support it. That's what we call counter argument. Okay, so you can write that way. Just make sure that you decide what style you want to adopt before you actually start writing. Because otherwise you will start realizing your response is getting confusing. So stick to one style, what you're comfortable with, what works for you. So if you think that a counter argumentative style is something that works for you, it's something that you can do justice to, use it. If not, stick to the simple format where you're talking about all advantages in one go or disadvantages in one go, along with the development, along with your own views, along with your own ideas for each and every single one of these points that I have highlighted, because ye sare points humne identify kar liye. So you don't just stop there, you develop them. You think of ways, ideas, facts and opinions, even examples to associate with each of these points.
Okay,
And
I
then you
wanted to ask
bring them in
should
your
we only give examples or personal experiences about the point we are in favor with or against?
that actually applies both ways. So examples, for example, अगर आप एक personal example की बात करते हो, let me give you an example in this regard. One of the past papers was on the idea of cell phones, whether cell phones should be banned in schools or not, right? So a very good personal example that I came across, a personal anecdote as we call them, I came across that a student had mentioned was the fact that when cell phones are associated with safety, and this was for a speech, so this was very effective because the student wrote that not only parents, but us as individuals associate safety with cell phones. And this person went on to write that, asked the audience, imagine you leave your classroom to go visit the washroom and you are stuck there, can't open the door. What do? The first thing that a student would do in that scenario would be to reach for their cell phone. So is tarah ka personal anecdote was very effective in that regard because it showed exactly how a student would associate having a cell phone with safety. Because they know they can call for help no matter what emergency they face. So is tarah ke personal experiences or examples, yes, using them is a good idea. use what-if scenarios, use examples. Speeches may specifically, it's very effective. Even with articles, you can have an example or two talking about how students these days experience issues, and you can use a very personal example there, or something that you have seen within your immediate vicinity or your school or your, you could say, collective student body. So historic examples definitely are a good idea to incorporate, because sometimes you may not have a lot of ideas to associate with the point, because that point itself is so simple and self-explanatory. In that case, aap example dalo, so that you can show that yes, there was something that you associated with that idea, some development. Basically, हमें development show करनी है. Okay, so when you talk about the idea of, say, social media in this regard, and they've talked about, say, health issues, you can elaborate by talking about examples of what these health problems can be. That can be your development. Your development can be a counter idea which negates this, or your development can be a further evaluation or further thought that further elaborates on how it's not just having mental health issues, but actually physical health issues as well. Because as you can see, they haven't mentioned physical health at this point. So you can actually talk about how social media is a distraction, is an entertaining thing that the students have been given now, which stops them or hinders their need to actually go outside and take part in physical activity. So you can even talk about how there are so many situations, so many days where a student does not even think twice before sitting in front of that screen, playing a video game, or trying to watch reels on Instagram, or take pictures on Snapchat, when they could just decide or choose to step outside and play an actual physical game. When you sit down, when you're bored, and you think to yourself, what should I do? How many times do young individuals actually go ahead and say, oh, I'm going to go outside, instead of picking up their phone and scrolling on these social media apps? इस तरह के examples as development आप डाल सकते हो यहाँ पे. Okay, so just keep in mind that a lot of times, as long as the question is saying that you have to give your opinion, so technically remaining neutral might not be possible, because you will either side with the advantages or disadvantages. So the
Can I
most
ask one
neutral,
thing?
just a second, let me just finish what I'm saying, and then you can go on with your question. The most neutral response to this could be like accepting the advantages of social media while saying that the disadvantages need to be taken care of in order to reap these advantages. That's the most neutral opinion you can give. That since the advantages are valuable enough, let's tackle these disadvantages. Let's follow these solutions so that this remains a beneficial thing. So that's probably the most neutral you can be with this. Go ahead, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, to what extent can we give examples or new points? Because sometimes they say that we should not be giving points out of the text and we should just evaluate those which are given by the examiner.
Okay, so for example, if I use this question at hand, when they say that you need to stick to the points as mentioned within the text as your baseline, the reason for that is, if I talk about social media, there is so much I can say, especially children your age, students your age. You have so much exposure to social media that there may be so much that you can actually say on the matter that is not mentioned within the text. So the reason why this text is there is so that you remain grounded in your response. So the baseline for your information should be from here.
Miss,
So as long as your development is associated with an idea from the text, that's fine. So
Miss,
it's,
how many points we
go
can
ahead.
write in one text, in one paragraph? Like text एक से हम 5 पॉइंट लिख दे और text B से 5 पॉइंट काफी है?
Okay, beta, you need to acknowledge the fact that it's not necessary that every time it's going to be 5 and 5. So it may be a balanced argument that they give you in the form of the text. It might be something that has, say, 6 points for advantages and only 4 for disadvantages. So in that regard, you might end up with a very long paragraph for one side as opposed to the other. In which case, it might actually be better कि आप उस लंबे paragraph को 2 में divide कर दो. So the first thing that I want to actually bring about here as something that I want all of you to keep in mind is paragraphing is a structural decision. The reason why we make paragraphs is so that information is not clustered together in a confusing format. हम paragraphs इसलिए बनाते हैं so that we can actually, you know, structure our information in a way that is easy to follow by the reader. So it's not a rule कि आपने 3 paragraph ही बनाने हैं. Okay, so if you believe that all 5 ideas with development does not look structurally incorrect in one paragraph, that's fine. But if you think it's, you know, too elaborate, it's getting too extended, divide it into 2 paragraphs, that's fine.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask that if you're supporting one side, for example, if I support that I'm in favor of social media, so all the points against opposing the use of social media, do I give counter arguments for that, for each point that opposes the use of social media?
You counter the ones you don't agree with. And you give solutions for the ones you do agree with. Let me give you an example. For example, after reading all of this, after evaluating all of these points, I have reached the conclusion that my opinion as the person writing this response is that social media is too important to completely ban, or how the advantages are just too significant to ignore. In that regard, what am I going to do? I am going to talk about how there are certain disadvantages of social media that need solutions so that these benefits can be reaped to their absolute potential. So I will go on to say that that students, young individuals of this day and age, are living in a world that is progressing so quickly that social media acts as a bridge for this constant evolution. And so it is very important to have certain measures in place that makes sure that will make sure that the disadvantages of social media are not significant enough to hold a student back or hold these young individuals back from being as successful as they want to be in life. So I'll use statements like this. I will acknowledge that yes, disadvantages exist, but because social media is so important, uske advantages itne zaruri hain that solutions need to be put in place. Let me give you the flip side of this. Agar mera opinion hai ki nahi, even though I'm a young individual who's writing this article for young individuals of the school to read, I believe that no, social media is too vast, too unpredictable to be left at the hands of young individuals of this day and age. So I will go on to talk about how we live in a day and age that is dominated by social media. However, it is very important to consider that young individuals are not mature enough to realize the drawbacks. And so it is very important to make sure that young individuals realize that there are certain drawbacks to social media that need to be acknowledged. And then I will go on to talk about the significant ones and how this is something that young people reading my article need to know so that they can protect themselves from the drawbacks of social media and not be blinded by these shiny advantages of social media. So that's how my opinion will sound or conclusion will sound if I favor the disadvantages.
Ma'am,
Will
excuse me.
acknowledge
ma'am.
that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
go ahead.
I wanted to ask, for example, if I'm writing an article, right? Can I write it in a way that I'm interacting with the fourth wall, like a 2000s magazine, cocky and bold, especially
so
for
you
a
need to,
teen magazine article?
all right, so you need to keep in mind that regardless of the fact that yes, my audience here is primarily students, young individuals, you have to keep in mind that this is an article you're writing for a school magazine, which is, there's a reason why they mention this, that this is an article for a school magazine. The reason why it says magazine is because they want you to keep your examples and development grounded for this audience. But at the same time, they want you to understand that this is going to be in a school. And whenever it says school, you need to keep in mind that there are three parties involved: the student body, the administration, and then the parent body. So this triangle is what makes up a school. So if they're saying that it's for a school magazine, you can have examples. Your language may, in a way, cater to those students, but please keep in mind using excessive informal terms will not go in your favor. In this regard,
Excuse me,
I
ma'am.
would, just a second, let me finish answering her question. In this regard, I would recommend that you read the examiner report for the summer paper that they've shared. There's a comment in there where a student used the word lousy, which the examiner picked up on and said that since this response was meant to be delivered in a school, using words like lousy is slightly excessively informal. So a word like lousy was picked up on. So I think that will give you a little bit of an idea on the kind of language you should be using within this response. Does that clarify your
Excuse
concern?
me,
Yes.
ma'am. Will this be uploaded on YouTube?
Probably yes. I'm not sure though.
Ma'am, how we get to know that this is persuasive, discursive, or argumentative?
All right. So basically, these three terms, persuasive, argumentative, discursive, these are writing styles. So the question is not going to demand that you write completely persuasively, because agar aap notice karo, yahan pe, if you look at this question alone, it says that you're writing in order to share when it says evaluate opinions from both texts, that means advantages and disadvantages. And then it goes on to say that you are giving your own views on the advantages and disadvantages of social media for young people based on what you have read. Now, in this case, what this means is कि आपका जो पहला point है ना, ये discursive है. Discursive का क्या मतलब होता है? Catering to both sides of the story. Whereas persuasive means I'm trying to convince an individual of my opinion. So as long as I am convincing someone, that is persuasive. So आपका opinion paragraph specifically for questions where you are convincing the audience. Now, in this case, it may not be that prominent, but if you look at, for example, let me show you one more. This is the question paper that I was referring to. Okay, if you look at this, it says that whether or not zoos should be banned. Now, in this case, if I am trying to convince an audience for an action, that is most certainly going to be persuasive, isn't it? If I am convincing my audience that yes, ban zoos, or no, do not ban zoos because they're too important, in this regard, my tone is extremely persuasive because I'm trying to convince them that this is why you shouldn't do this, or this is why you should do this. So anywhere where you are convincing someone, trying to bring forward an idea with support, that is persuasive. So keep in mind, these responses are always a combination. However, the third word you used was argumentative. Argumentative style of writing is something that you can actually use if you use the counter argument style of writing. So उसमें फिर आपका combination क्या बन जाएगा? Argumentative plus persuasive. But अगर आप specifically advantages अलग, disadvantages अलग कर रहे हो, तो ये क्या है? Discursive plus persuasive. Does that clarify your concern?
Yes.
Yeah. So I hope that has some clarity associated with that now.
Ma'am?
Yeah.
Ma'am,
When evaluating points from the text that we disagree with, do we counter them when we're evaluating them, or do we initially favor them and then negate them later on?
Okay, so basically you're not, it's not like initially favoring them and negating them, because then तो आप अपने आप को ही contradict कर रहे हो. So that's contradiction. So let me give you an example using this paper. This paper is on the speech that you had to write regarding whether or not zoos should be banned, right? So over here, I came across this point that zoos help protect animals. Now, in this case, if I say that zoos help protect animals, although I am an individual who is writing this response, keeping in mind that I believe zoos should be banned because of the way they treat animals. It's inherently, I believe, morally it's wrong. Zoos should not exist. Okay? Now that's my opinion. But जब मैंने ये point पढ़ा, zoos help protect animals. I can agree with this, while still saying that ban them. Because yes, at one point, I can say that yes, zoos do protect animals from nature itself. Because there are certain factors in nature that are causing these animals to go extinct. So I can agree with this. And then later on give an opinion that disagrees with the idea of zoos altogether.
So we can have a paragraph in our writing that supports all these points, and then later on we can say that even though we do this, that is more like
So
important.
your tone will, in that regard, your tone basically will be that yes, all of these benefits exist. Okay. Yes, a zoo is helping create awareness to some extent. Yes, it is protecting animals in certain scenarios where nature itself is harming these animals. तो वो मेरी डेवलपमेंट हो गई ना, इस प्रोटेक्शन को मैंने एक ऐसी डेवलपमेंट दी जो मेरे ओपिनियन को काउंटर ना करे. So if I believe that yes, in some cases a zoo is protecting an animal from the dangers within nature, for example wildfires or diseases, so in that regard, yes, I can favor a zoo with that one point. But later on, I will talk about how inherently and morally I believe that zoos are wrong, because animals belong in the wild. And so instead of investing in a zoo, I'm giving a solution ताकि मेरा ये protection वाला point negate ना हो जाए. It's important to protect animals. And so instead of investing in a zoo, why not invest in making nature, that wild habitat, safe enough for the animal so that we don't have anything that needs to be taken care of to protect this animal?
So we can evaluate it, but we evaluate
Yes.
it in a way that it doesn't like contradict our own points.
So I will say that yes, zoos help protect animals from factors like diseases and other natural occurrences that the animal might not be able to protect itself from. And then जब मैं अपना opinion दे रही हूँ कि I believe this should be banned because an animal belongs in the wild. So in order to safeguard this right, it is more important to invest in making sure that that wild habitat does not have anything in it that this animal needs to be protected from.
But then, Miss, wouldn't that affect other species in that same habitat? That would
What do you
just
mean?
turn negative again.
What do you
Like
mean?
if you're focusing on a specific species to be able to live properly, then wouldn't that affect the species which depend on that endangered species for food to be affected as well?
No, but that's what we're trying to counter, isn't it? Now, that's why I said use examples that you don't end up contradicting yourself. So if I talk about protection, for example, if I say global warming, cutting down trees, deforestation, is any animal going to suffer if I stop investing in getting rid of deforestation? So if I say that deforestation is one of the examples that is actually causing a lot of harm to these animals, which is why people have started to bring them into zoos. So why not stop deforestation in the first place so that nature can exist as naturally as possible, so that all animals within that natural habitat can live freely, can live in a habitat that they are meant to live in inherently, instead of bringing them to a zoo and investing there.
In that case, yeah, I agree.
Do you understand that? So for
Yeah.
example, obviously if I focus on one species altogether, again, I'm doing something that is not very natural. So if I make a natural habitat safe for one species, that is not natural. That's not how nature intended that space to be. So the biggest thing that we can talk about here, or the most prominent factor that we can talk about in this regard for this point, for example, would be to talk about how about investing in getting rid of human intervention in natural habitats, so that all the creatures that belong in the wild can stay in the wild, do not have anything that they need protection from, and so they can thrive as naturally and as safely as they need to, while making that space as beneficial for that animal as possible.
Ma'am, can I ask a question?
So go ahead.
If we take a point from text A, so we have to take counter argument point from text B, or we have to make it ourselves.
All right, so you will notice that sometimes text A or text B आपस में एक दूसरे को contradict कर रहे होते हैं. So sometimes they provide you with enough counter arguments to counter each of these texts. So where does development come in then? So definitely development at your own input is required. So for example, agar let me just finish answering her question. For example, if she's talking about the idea of let's just take the same point. Ye wala point, dekho, number 10. The money you pay to visit helps to fund all of these zoos. And at the same time, if you look at the opposite side, it says right over here that a lot of times what happens is that these animals don't end up reaping the benefits of this money or these funds that have been accumulated. So in a way, this point counters that one. So based on what I want to say, I will develop this further ताकि वो मेरी development भी नजर आए और counter argument भी ना हो. So I will go on to say that if zoos are completely eradicated, then all those individuals who are making significant charity donations and making an effort to actually, make sure this cash flow keeps going, they will reduce significantly. Because a lot of donors out there actually end up donating because they are closely associated with these spaces. अगर आप किसी चीज को अपने सामने देखते हो, so it's easier for you to connect to that. So if these people have no access to these animals, it will reduce the number of people donating because it's in human nature. We feel strongly about something that's in front of us. So इस चीज को, for the first point, I can develop it in a way that it's within human nature to be closely associated with something so that they can realize that they're making a difference. And as far as this corruption point is concerned, we can make sure, or you can say that, there are certain guidelines that need to be put into place ताकि इस तरह की corruption ना हो. So either ways, आप दोनों की counter argument जरूर दोगे. Does that clarify your concern?
Yes.
Ma'am,
Yes.
how to deal introductory paragraph?
Okay, so I am going to go over that with an example.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
can I use this style of writing कि मैं एक positive point लिखती हूँ, like even though I'm supporting the negative point of view, right? In the zoos चले हम example ले लेते हैं, तो मैं अपना positive point लिखती हूँ और उसकी development negative करती हूँ. तो मैं ये style use कर सकती हूँ?
Of course. Okay, so I think a good way to answer all of these questions would be if we look at an example. Let's start with this one. I'm sure most of you would have gone over this examiner's report. Anyone who has not, make sure you do this today. Make sure you go over this examiner's report because this will help you understand exactly how a response is graded and exactly what is expected in order to provide a response the examiner actually wants. So someone just asked me.
Share this
I will share it in the group. I'll share it.
All right, thank you.
All right, no worries. All right, so please keep in mind that when we are talking about any response whatsoever, please make sure that the introduction is basically meant to look at this. I'll show you the introduction for each of the formats and then we'll go back to the examiner's report. So for example, if you're writing a letter, the introduction basically has to cater to the individual you're writing to, of course. So you will definitely address that person. That's one thing. Secondly, you will make sure that the purpose, the topic statement is incorporated within that introduction. And then there is something that we call a bridging sentence, which basically indicates of what is to follow. ये तीन चीजें आपकी introduction में हमेशा आएंगी. The way you phrase this depends on the kind of response, of course. So if we are writing a letter, obviously it's going to have a very personal tone in terms of how we're actually writing to one individual. If the same thing is to be for an article. Article ka introduction will basically focus on the idea again of bringing forward what the topic is, which we call a topic statement, followed by a bridging statement that addresses how there are contrasting views where one stands more prominently in front of the other. Okay? So the introduction, no matter what format we're following, content of the introduction basically यही होता है. उसमें आप एक topic statement जरूर डालोगे और आप अपनी argument को hint जरूर करोगे. The tone, however, will vary. For example, अगर हम speech लिख रहे हैं, so I will address my audience through this.
Ma'am, can
If
you give
I'm-
an example of a bridging sentence?
Okay, let me show you a response. For example, अगर आप इसी response को ले लो. Today, I will be shedding light on whether or not zoos should be banned. This is a statement that hints towards exactly what is to follow. हर पैराग्राफ के एंड पे आपकी एक स्टेटमेंट आती है that connects it to what is to follow. For example, if you look at the second paragraph, it ends with a statement talking about how shorter lifespans than they would if they were in the wild. And then the next paragraph is actually speaking of the idea of how, so this ends with the idea of shorter lifespans. And then they talk about how, in addition, many have argued that zoos are the perfect element to impart and raise awareness for these factors that are causing this reduced lifespan. So do you see how the previous point is not something that's completely off from what follows? This is what we call a bridge between two paragraphs. सबसे ज़रूरी ये first paragraph में इसलिए होता है because this is basically where you are hinting towards what is to follow. So for example, if you look at this introduction, now this is an introduction for a speech. I will tell you what this would look like for other formats as well. They always tell you what to start off with. So they've started off with good morning and an introduction of who this person is. I want you all to take a moment and ask yourself if you enjoy a trip to the zoo or if it saddens you to observe these poor animals locked in cages for their entire lives, locked away from their real homes in the wilderness. Earlier, someone asked me, is it okay to hint towards our opinion as we go? It's perfectly fine. You can do that. It's not necessary that you do that, but it's a good way to actually establish an argument. अब इसी चीज को अगर for example, I didn't want to make the reader think that zoos are bad and I want them to think of it as a positive thing. Let me give you an alternate beginning in a positive light. So in that regard, I'd probably go on to say, good morning, everyone. I want you all to take a minute, close your eyes and think back to that moment you first walked into a zoo hand in hand with your father as he told you about his first experience of visiting a zoo. How many of you cherished that moment? अगर मैं इस तरह के beginning से शुरू करती हूँ, so now what tone am I setting? I'm setting a positive tone in regards to zoos. So I will mention all the negatives later on. However, now I've set a tone that hints towards this specific topic in a positive light. But अगर आप ये जो मेरे screen पे introduction है इसको देखो, this is something that is already hinting towards a negative aspect associated with zoos, while still making sure that they incorporate all the positives as they go. For example, they've still mentioned that these spaces are enabling scientists to safeguard animals because they are able to study them in a way that is not possible in the wild. However, all of these positives, despite the fact that they're being mentioned, this person goes on to still mention that in this person's perception, it would still be better to ban a zoo. Because no matter how much we protect an animal in a zoo, what we're doing is we're damaging the natural habitats of the wild. So all of these steps that we take to safeguard these animals in an artificial environment is having an adverse effect on nature itself. तो इस पॉइंट से उसने अपने सारे नेगेटिव्स को सपोर्ट कर दिया while still saying that yes, positives exist. However, these negatives are just too significant. Does all of that make sense?
Yes, miss.
Yes. All right. So now I am going to give you guys 10 minutes of questions for directed writing before I transition to composition. So we have 10 minutes where if you have any questions regarding directed writing, you can ask me and I'll answer them.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
we have to make one paragraph of advantages and one paragraph of disadvantages, right? Or we have to gather it like argumented together.
Beta, I'm going to answer this again, and I want everyone to focus on this. The body paragraph for anything, चाहे वो article हो, चाहे वो speech हो, जो भी हो, it depends on you whether you want to do this completely discursively, कि आप एक जगह advantages और एक जगह disadvantages करते हो, या फिर आप counter argument करते हो. दोनों styles are perfectly fine. Just make sure that no matter what you do, there should be development. Okay, so both of these are correct forms of writing. The response that I just showed you from the examiner's report, this student had used the approach you're just talking about. Positives one in one and negatives together. That's fine. So it's completely up to you. Use the structure that you are comfortable with. If counter arguments is something you're comfortable with, go ahead and use it. If you believe that specifically talking about one idea first and then the other is better for you, do that. They're both correct. Just make sure कि आपका जो opinion हो, उसको आप support ज़रूर दो. Don't just say that this is my opinion and then end it there. Make sure that there is certain development and certain support given with your opinion. Okay?
How should I develop my point?
Yes, you have to make sure you develop each of the points that you mentioned.
जो फॉर्मल होता है उसमें हम लोग अपनी एग्जांपल्स तो नहीं ना दे सकते experiences and all.
Okay, so beta, depending on the fact that, okay, if you're talking about a letter, the most formal form of writing would be if it's a letter addressed to an individual who is someone in power. आप अगर report ले लो, obviously report writing is a very formal form of writing. Even with articles and speeches, there is a certain element of formality still incorporated within your response. So obviously your examples cannot be too personal, no matter what your response is about. They can have slight informality in them, lekin even for a formal response, if you include an example, a personal experience that you believe helps that person understand why you're saying what you're saying, that's fine. For example, अगर मैं एक letter लिख रही हूँ, which is talking about banning the use of cell phones in school. And I am a student who believes or wants to tell the principal that, ma'am, I want you to ban phones in school. And an example I give her is that recently you have experienced a lot of bullying because of the cell phone you carry. That's a personal experience, isn't it? But it's a valid point to say why this ban needs to be implemented. Does that clarify your concern?
Yes,
Ma'am?
thank you.
Does that clarify your concern?
Yes.
All right. You guys, I'm going to repeat one more time. Please use the chat only for questions. Otherwise, I will have to disable it.
Ma'am?
Yeah.
हम word limit को कितना exceed कर सकते हैं?
Okay, this is one thing that I was going to address in composition, but I will address it right now as well. Absolutely not. Do not keep in mind that you are allowed to exceed the word limit. Whether it's for composition or directed writing, the word limit exists for a reason. The examiner expects you to follow through with it. All right, so all those students who have this misconception that it's okay to exceed the word limit if our response is very well written, beta, don't do this to
Miss,
yourself.
can you give an example of how we can write paragraph 4, like our own opinion? Miss, can you give an
Yeah, I'm showing you the sample right now. Why don't you read this? This is the opinion of the individual on Zoom.
Ma'am, can you also share this ECR?
Oh, yes, I will share it in the community group. So everyone has it. Please make sure all of you read it.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
should we send the formats of all directed writing in the group?
All right. So yeah, I can do that. I'll share the screenshots.
Okay, thanks.
Excuse me, can I ask a question?
Yes. So go ahead.
So let's say if I do pick a side, does my opinion have to be obvious throughout my response or only in the end?
Okay, so again, that depends on the style of writing. For example, if you look at the introduction for this response, doesn't this already hint towards what this individual believes? When the student says that I want you all to take a moment to ask yourself if you enjoy a trip to the zoo or if it saddens you to observe these poor animals locked in cages for their entire lives, locked away from their real homes in the wilderness. Can you tell what this child favors?
Right, so it's obvious that he's gonna, like, his response is gonna be in favor of banning zoos.
And then talks about how this person wants to shed light on whether a ban is the best way forward.
Right, thank you.
Okay? So you will notice that I will share some more samples in the community as well, for articles and letters and all of that, so that you have one response for each of the formats. And that will help you understand how it is basically your decision if you want to go for a very counter argument style of writing, or you want to stick to one side first and then the other. However, this clarity that you've noticed in this first paragraph, if you start off with this as well, it will be very easy for you to actually make sure that your response does not contradict whatever you're saying as well. So just because I'm acknowledging something as true does not mean that I believe in it.
Miss जो ईसा के अंदर आपके पास दिखा है माय मतलब अकॉर्डिंग टू मी, तो हम लोग वर्ड तो ऐसा यूज नहीं कर सकते ना कि अकॉर्डिंग टू मी वाला आपके पास कि हम लोग सिर्फ अपना
स्पीच, दिस इज अ स्पीच,
और उसके अलावा हम नहीं कर सकते.
Beta, there's nothing wrong with saying that this is my perception. However, if you believe that this is something that is not going with the flow of your writing, for example, अगर आप article लिख रहे हो, letter में तो आप ये कह सकते, that is my humble opinion, Madam Principal, that this ban should be implemented for the safeguarding of the students. अगर मैं इस तरह एक address करके principal से बात करूँ, तो saying that it's my opinion is not wrong. But in an article, since it's more generic, if you go on to say that, however, despite the existing disadvantages, it is imperative for us to focus more on these advantages for these reasons, or to believe, or the argument prevails that the advantages far outweigh the negatives. अब मैंने ये नहीं कहा it is my opinion that the advantages are more important. I will generically say that, in conclusion, despite the existing advantages, it can be concluded, or it is understood that the disadvantages far outweigh the disadvantages. Obviously, मैंने नहीं कहा my opinion. I just generically said that this side of the argument favors the other. Sorry, outweighs the other. Does that answer your question?
Yes, miss. Thank you so much.
All right, no worries. Anything else?
Ma'am, I have
Yeah.
a question.
Go ahead.
Ma'am, for report writing, how do we display our opinion? Because we have to be formal.
Just a second, let me show you. Okay, so basically when you are sharing your opinions in regards to a report, it specifically gets its own heading that says opinions or recommendations. Okay, for example, if the question is focusing on whether or not cell phones should be banned, so my opinion paragraph would probably be headed as recommendations, because I'm recommending that this ban should be implemented. And then I'm giving reasons why, to convince this person in authority why this report shows that although, yes, certain benefits exist, these are the reasons why this ban should be implemented, because the drawbacks are just too significant. Does that make sense? So you will simply give it a heading for recommendations or opinions based on what the question demands. And then you will highlight how, based on these reasons, this action should be taken, or you recommend that this ban should be implemented, or recommend that this ban should not be implemented.
Okay, ma'am, thank you.
All right. Someone just asked me what the difference between an article and a report is and how you differentiate. But the question will clearly say if it's a report or an article. And the biggest differentiation in your response when it's a report and article, there are two things. एक तो subheadings, article में subheadings नहीं होती, report में होती हैं. Secondly, it's the formality. A report is a very formal document. So your tone, your overall language is very formal because when you're writing a report, you are addressing this response to an individual who has the authority to take an action on the matter. So the formality is obviously going to be very different. All right. Any more questions for directed writing before we move on?
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes.
Ma'am, if we have slight informality, like we don't like हमें समझना है कि formal words कहाँ add करें, हम भूल जाएं. For example, report में, तो उसके marks ज़्यादा कटेंगे या slight errors की वजह से कम deduct होंगे?
Okay, beta, so listen, when I talk about formality, one thing that you need to keep in mind is, what is formality? It's our tone, right? So basically, I am maintaining a formal tone if I'm not directly addressing as, I'm sure you know better on what needs to be done, or I'm sure you know better not to ignore me, or things like that. Statements that are informal, obviously I won't use them because I know I need to remain formal. All right. So yes, certain transition statements, certain terms like talking about how in contrast, on the contrary, however, moreover, such terms, obviously you can make a list of, read through, and then make sure you incorporate them. All right. Straightforward sentence structures will obviously add to the formality as well. Okay, your choice of vocabulary adds to your formality as well. So I'm sure you're not going to forget that I can't say lousy in a report that I'm writing to the principal, or I can't call a decision that the principal made as a ridiculous one. Would you say that that's formal?
No, not definitely.
No, right? So I will definitely use words that I know I would want to use in this scenario. So obviously keep in mind that if you are writing a response that you are expected to reflect a formal tone with, so obviously your words have to reflect that.
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay.
I get the gist.
Any more questions? I have
Can
Aline has a question.
I have a question.
Sure, go
Right.
ahead.
Basically, I am evaluating rightly. I am taking point from text, but I don't know how to write it. I am not correctly explaining my words, as my vocabulary is bad. So what can I do?
All right, in that regard, I would suggest that if you have trouble elaborating a point with a lot of, excessively, you say complex vocabulary, if that's something that's not your forte, what I would suggest is try to incorporate examples then. Just simply elaborate with examples.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Olva, you have a question?
That cell phones wala. So like our first would be introductory, our second में जब हम support करें हम उसके बताएंगे, और third would be like उसके disadvantages for the counter argument. So अगर हमारा वो counter is longer than the advantages, तो is it fine still कि हम end में advantages को ही support करें?
Beta, okay, so you do not build an opinion based on what's longer as a paragraph, right? Obviously, your opinion will be built on ideas that you strongly agree with. Okay? So it's possible that something has 10 disadvantages, but it has that one advantage that you believe is so important that it cannot be ignored. For example, if I talk about cell phones in school, there are so many factors that I can actually highlight in terms of how it is not a good thing to have a cell phone in school. However, I can still go on to say that yes, these cell phones are important for a child to have in their possession when they're walking home from school. So I can still say that no, the ban should not be implemented. Certain guidelines need to be put in place ताकि वो जो negatives हैं वो counter हो जाएं. But at the same time, this one benefit of the cell phone can still be reaped by the student. Does that make sense?
Yes, miss. Thank you.
So just make sure, do not go with quantity. It's about perception. It's possible for you to agree with something that everybody disagrees with because you have one strong point that helps you actually identify why this is important. So many of you will say that no, zoos should be banned because it is morally incorrect for an animal to be in that space. However, so many of you will still side with the fact that such establishments are needed because nature itself is not safeguarded enough. Some animals need this enclosed space so that they can be safeguarded from extinction. And you won't be wrong to say that. Neelam, you have a question?
Teacher, I wanted to ask that how are opinion and conclusion different from each other?
All right. So when we write an opinion, we are basically stating what the belief of that argument is. So we sum up by saying, okay, advantages, disadvantages, but this is what outweighs the other. You've stated your opinion and you've given support as well. Conclusion basically is where you end with a statement that, again, in light of your opinion, sums it up. So a very simple explanation of what a conclusion or why it's significant is kind of like saying, for example, when you have to give someone a present, you've packed it up in a box, you've wrapped it up with your wrapping paper. The last thing that you do is you make sure you tie it up with a nice ribbon. But you will also make sure that the ribbon matches your wrapping paper, isn't it? So let's think that your wrapping paper is your opinion and that ribbon is your conclusion.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so you wrap up with a statement that obviously is in line with your your opinion, and it just wraps it up to set a tone. I'll give you an example. For example, if we're talking about social media, the question I showed you earlier, and you gave the opinion that social media is something that is very important for students because it is something that they are not only dependent on, but have learned to use for their benefit. So they use it for something good. ये सारा opinion दे दिया, मैंने support भी कर दिया, and I've written that nice paragraph. I'll wrap up by saying that, okay, for example, it's an article. I'll wrap up by saying, we live in a day and age where young or old individuals, all individuals, be it young or old, feel the need to remain connected with the world. And social media is that one thing that allows us to do so with the convenience of a touch. So why take that away? इस तरह की statement से I'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Okay. If it were, so anything that you basically would want to just a statement that wraps it up in a very nice, clean, crisp manner. Okay, Arham, I believe you have a question.
Yes, I wanted to ask that in article writing, do we write the text from our point of view, or we just say that, for example, Dash says that in a recent study?
All right, so please keep in mind that the text reference does not need to be given. There is no, the examiner does not require this. They know what you want to do with this. I understand what you're trying to say, but beta, you do not need to give reference to the text. You don't need to give reference to the text. It's not a requirement. It might actually go negatively towards the evaluation point.
Thank you.
आप summary नहीं लिख रहे. So anyone who has this misconception that you need to refer to saying that Sam from text A says this, please take my word for it. If you don't believe my word, look at the marking schemes, look at the examiner report. You are not required to give reference to the text. So much so that I have gotten in touch with an examiner for Cambridge who has also mentioned that this is not a requirement by any means whatsoever. Do not give reference to the text. Do not say Sam from text A says this. Please do not do that. You will end up losing marks. Okay?
I wanted to ask.
Miss, I have a question.
Yeah, yes, miss.
Miss, I have a question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I wanted to ask that in the directed writing, is it appropriate if we add factual evidence, like mentioning a recent study? For example, a recent study shows that 70% of
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
fine.
So can we add it?
Yes. Don't go overboard with that. हर point के लिए आप ना करना शुरू कर दो. But adding one of that is perfectly fine. It's a good idea.
All right, thanks.
Rehan, okay, that was your question.
Ma'am?
Who's next? Yes.
Is copy paste like some point I am copy pasting from the text, so it will be negative point?
Exam
Beta, it will count as you identifying the correct point, but you will not be awarded marks for evaluation then. So again, copy pasting a statement exactly from the text will not be in your favor. So do not do that, because again, the requirement here is to evaluate, to develop. So again, we're not writing a summary, are we? So please keep in mind that you are expected to evaluate, you are expected to develop. So copy pasting will not be something that awards you a lot of marks.
Miss article समझा सकते
Sorry, Aban, was
Is
that your
it good
question?
to write all the positive points in one paragraph, or do we have to write one positive point and one negative point in one paragraph?
Okay, so basically, Bache, what you're saying is these are two different styles of writing, which are both correct. So either you use a counter argument style, but make sure consistently फिर आप वही करो. अगर आप, if you feel more comfortable highlighting one idea first and then focusing on the other completely, that's also fine.
मिस आर्टिकल समझा दें
Bache, we've just gone over the entire article. But let me see what I can do about that. All right, any more questions for what we've talked about so far? Varda, you have a question?
मैम जब
Yes,
दो
miss.
दो आर्ग्यूमेंट दिए होते हैं तो एक फेवर में होता है, एक होता है दूसरा डिसएडवांटेज होते हैं, तो हमें क्या, जब हम उनको दूसरा कंबाइन करके लिखते हैं तो हमें एक एवेल्युएशन देनी होती है? Is it true?
Bache, that depends on the way you're writing. Obviously, every single point needs to be evaluated.
मैम लेटर और ईमेल की टोन वेरी करती है या सेम होगी? अगर
Beta,
फॉर्मल पे डिपेंड
if
करे
it's a
तो?
formal, then it will be a formal tone. If it's informal, it will be an informal tone. I'd like to answer the questions for the kids who actually raised their hands. So, Varda?
Miss, I want to ask whether we need to change the whole text or like we can change as just the synonyms. Like beautiful का pretty कर दिया तो सिर्फ synonyms चलेगा या पूरा sentence को rewrite करना पड़ेगा?
Beta, again, this is not a paraphrasing task. So your task isn't to replicate the texts they gave you. Your task is to identify those ideas. उसके बाद उस text को छोड़ दो, उन ideas पे focus करो.
Assalamualaikum, ma'am.
Yes, go ahead.
So I have a question over here. My name is Sahar. My question is that in the text, for example, let's say the text is about homework. Sorry, social media.
All right.
इसमें effects of social media की बात हो रही है कि children who use social media a lot can lag behind at school.
Okay.
इसमें in evaluation or in I guess it would be counted as a development if I say that I have seen my friend who spend a lot of time on social media, and as a result she scores lower grade at school. Is it right?
Okay, so you will basically have to develop that slightly further. So if you're saying that a lot of students end up lagging behind in school because of their excessive use of social media, you can talk about how it is reducing. You've seen your class fellows suffer because they do not leave themselves ample time to actually produce a perfect response to whatever assignment or test they may have, because they're not giving themselves the right amount of time for it. So आप ये
It
लिख
will be
सकते हैं.
counted as development or evaluation?
But a development evaluation technically is the same thing.
Okay.
So you are
So
developing that thought. So where they're saying that they're suffering in school, you give an example of how this is because they're not giving themselves the right amount of time required to complete a task. If I am supposed to spend 1 hour writing a response, say for directed writing, you're supposed to spend 1 hour. So if I am not giving you that 1 hour, what am I doing? I'm crippling your response. So no matter how good you are at that task, if you're not given the fair amount of time, you're not allowing yourself to spend that much time on it, am I not crippling you? If I allow you to do whatever you want, you need to step out of this room with a response after 1 hour. And I leave you alone with your phone as well. And you choose to spend 30 minutes on your cell phone, what are you doing? You're leaving yourself with only 30 minutes for a task that requires that.
एग्जामिनर ने सिर्फ दो बातें दी। पहली बात शेप, बच्चे को शेप के बारे में पता था। दूसरी बात बच्चे ने ग्रेडियंट पॉजिटिव रखा और तीसरी बात बच्चे ने वाई इंटरसेप्ट नेगेटिव रखा।
All right, does that clarify your concern?
Yes, ma'am. Another question I wanted to ask something like those can be argued and
माइनस को
how
बहुत -3 यहाँ पे बढ़िया +-3 लिख देंगे। जी गैस अब इसको कहाँ पे कट करेगा?
Sorry, can you repeat that? There was a lot of disturbance, so I couldn't hear you.
My question is like, should I include these kind of phrases like, however, it could be denied, like such kind of phrases?
Yeah, I had a question that
Sorry,
can we
go ahead.
start our speech by a quotation?
Okay, so they've already given you the beginning where it says start with good morning, but you may. That's fine.
No, but if they say specifically that we are supposed to start with good morning, can we still start with a quote?
Okay, so I have seen certain responses which have not been penalized for this. Do make sure you still continue with good morning, everyone. So, for example, if you start with, okay, let me show you an examiner response for this. This student starts with respected teacher and my dear fellows. The examiner did not question this. So this is not considered as a negative thing here. If you look at the examiner's response, he's not going to say that he minds this. Just make sure that it is consistently appropriate. So whatever your quote is, if you're starting with that and then you go on to say that, good morning, everyone, I'd like to talk to you about this. That's fine. That's effective.
Also, another question, how do we make our speech introduction energetic and make sure it's not a lackluster?
It's not a what? Sorry?
Like, how do we make sure that it makes an impact?
Okay,
It's
so
interesting.
all right, so the thing, what you just said using a quote, that's good enough. That's actually an interesting way to start. Just make sure that after that, you do mention what this is going to actually entail. So for example, if you start off with a quote and then you say, good morning, everyone. Today, I would like to bring your attention to a very pressing matter. And then you highlight what that pressing matter is. Or if you look at this response, for example, this student goes on with a what if scenario, asks the students to actually think of something, a moment in time where they went for a trip, and then hinted towards what this person believes about zoos. Okay, does that clarify your concern?
Yeah, and is it discouraged to use transition
Ma'am,
words in a
aren't we
speech?
supposed to first introduce ourselves like to
Hashir, I'm going to answer your question in a minute. Let me finish answering her question. Using transition words is never a bad idea. Obviously, using them ineffectively just for the sake of it, obviously that's going to be bad. But other than that, using them is not bad. Use transition words where they're needed. Okay, Hashir, you had a question?
Got it, thank you.
No worries. Ji, Hashir. All right, can we move on to composition now?
Teacher,
Miss.
Yes.
where we can find the recording of this class?
Which I'm not sure right now, but I'll make sure I can try and make it available for you guys.
Miss.
Ji.
Based on the word count we have for directed writing, sometimes it's hard to develop every single point you have identified. So let's just say I've identified 10 points. What is the minimum possible points I should be developing or evaluating?
But obviously the effectiveness matters. There's no set number here. However, it's very important to try and incorporate as many as possible. But that also doesn't mean that you do so in order to, like, by compromising either the word limit or your overall tone and vocabulary. Okay? So again, अगर 10 points given, that doesn't mean आप सिर्फ 2 को बहुत effectively करो. ठीक है? अगर आप एक आध छोड़ देते हो, that's, I'm not saying do it intentionally, but अगर आपके रह जाते हैं, it's okay. But then again, make sure you are doing justice to the points that you're mentioning.
All
So
right,
you
thank
justify
you.
them through evaluation.
Ma'am, on the question of writing, they asked to put a comma after good morning. So can I put a comma after everyone as well?
An exclamation mark might even work.
Exclamation mark?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Miss,
Ma'am,
is
can
the
we make
format of
can we make points before writing a report?
But if okay, so a lot of students have this confusion that they are not allowed to plan out their response. Please make sure you don't spend too much time doing that and too much space doing that, because obviously no extra sheets will be given. But if you do write a few points here and there to help you remember, that's fine.
Okay, miss. Thank you.
Miss, are formats for every composition very specific?
All right, so as far as composition writing is concerned, now this is section B, which is where you either have your narrative or descriptive. So now I'm going to transition completely to composition writing, because there are 2-3 points that I really want to discuss, जो students बहुत ज़्यादा पूछ रहे हैं, and they have a huge misconception about. So I want to explain this. Composition is where you have 4 questions, जिसमें 2 descriptive और 2 narrative की options होती हैं, and you're required to choose one of these. Okay, so you're only expected to write one response, which will either be a descriptive or narrative, number one. Secondly, please understand that the candidate is required to write about 350 to 450 words only. So anyone here who has the misconception that they are allowed to write after 450 words, please stand corrected that you are not allowed to do so. Okay, all examiner comments so far have hinted towards the fact that students who are writing excessively are actually compromising their response by doing so, because then you are unable to actually write the content within that limit that actually is required in terms of those narrative or descriptive elements. Okay, so please make sure that if you're writing your response, you plan it out beforehand so that you do not exceed the word limit. Okay, so exceeding the word limit, whether it's for directed writing or composition, is not encouraged by the examiner. So I hope that clarifies anyone who had this concern. 450 words is your limit. So stick to that word limit. Otherwise, it will cost you marks.
What is the maximum
300 words.
words
Sorry?
that we can exceed it?
Beta, again, okay. I will answer this with reference to the examiner's report.
Ma'am, what if we write 350 words?
Beta, 350 is within the limit, so that's fine.
Ma'am, in
Okay, ma'am.
section A, does the format have to be very specific?
For what, sorry?
For the section A,
All right, what about it?
does the format have to be very specific for the speech, report writing, or article, any of that?
Bacha, yes, it is important that if you're writing a speech, then your speech should look like a speech. I am showing you the examiner's report for this year's summer paper. And if you look at this last comment right here, it says that this response exceeded the indicative word count, and had the candidate written less, they would have had time to check the response for errors, particularly in punctuation, and as such achieved higher marks. And this response only exceeded by 50 words. So what does that mean? The examiner does not want you to exceed word limits.
Ma'am,
Yes.
अगर sentence complete करने के लिए आप like 5 to 10 words exceed कर दें, is that like?
Okay, if it's 5 words, which is just completing a statement, that's one thing. If 5-6 words ऊपर हो जाते हैं, इतना शायद examiner बर्दाश्त कर ले, but not more than that. Okay, the reason why I am using this point as something I start off my discussion with is because this is the biggest reason why you might end up losing marks, because it actually compromises the actual task at hand.
मैम
Yes.
ज्यादा वर्ड होने पे नेगेटिव मार्किंग होती है?
Sorry, किस पे negative?
अगर वर्ड ज्यादा वर्ड लिमिट क्रॉस
Yes.
कर दे।
But you will end up scoring less than you were supposed to.
Okay.
To the word
Ma'am,
limit.
एक और चीज कि is it necessary to write the format for letter, और email के लिए तो हमें लिखना पड़ता है ना, like our email ID and then the email ID of the recipient, but letter के लिए भी is it important या
You're not required to write any of that, either for a letter or an email.
we can just start from dear sir, whatever
Yes.
salutation is given by them.
So you start off with dear sir. Students are not speaking. Can you please mute it?
मैम आई हैव अ क्वेश्चन।
Go ahead.
जो हमने इवैल्यूएशन करनी होती है वो हमने एंड पे एक अलग पैराग्राफ बनाना होता है कि हमने साथ साथ पॉइंट्स की उसको डेवलप करके साथ इवैल्यूएशन करनी होती है?
Beta, evaluation and development has to happen when you mention the point.
Miss, could you give an example?
But we've gone over directed writing completely. So, yeah.
Miss, I have joined late.
Ma'am,
Yes.
but we have to choose between narrative or descriptive. That what will be easy for us to do.
But I would recommend that it actually depends on you. If you are confident with
Because हमारे
narratives,
स्कूल के टीचर सारे कहते हैं कि आप नैरेटिव किया करें, नैरेटिव ज्यादा कंपैरेटिवली डिस्क्रिप्टिव पे इजी होता है.
Beta, it actually depends on you. A lot of students are more confident with their descriptive skills, and they will always go for description. Some students, a lot of students actually believe that writing a narrative is easier. So you go with what's easy for you.
Okay, miss.
There is no bias against them.
Miss,
They will be
I
creating.
couldn't get the answer of the format question I asked. My internet was disconnected.
But I'll make it a point to share all the formats in the group.
Ma'am, what if
Can you share?
we
Can you share the
memorize
recording of this class?
I'll try.
Miss, which group?
The community, the WhatsApp community.
मैम अगर हम मेमोराइज कर लें नैरेटिव के लिए एक्सप्रेशन तो विल इट बी बेटर कि एग्जामिनर को पता नहीं चलेगा?
Okay, I will answer that in just a minute. I am going to go over the general structure for composition now, and then I will take some questions for composition writing. Okay? And I'm hoping that all of these questions will be answered once I'm done talking.
Okay.
All right. So when we talk about composition writing, the first guideline that you guys need to keep in mind is the fact that this is a task that is either divided for 2 questions for descriptive and 2 questions for narratives. And you choose one based on your ability to produce a response that effectively answers that question. So regardless of whether you choose to write a descriptive or a narrative, since most students are more inclined towards writing a narrative, I will start off with this, and then I will move on to talk about descriptive writing. So for example, you've been asked to write a narrative. You will be given 2 questions, which will one of which will be a general scenario, and the other prompt will actually be a statement that you're expected to use within your response. So in both cases, the first thing that you're expected to do is build a story, build a series of events that has a logical flow to it, falls within the word limit of 350 to 450 words and no more than that, while using the given prompt with clarity and with effect. So what do I mean by with effect? That this prompt makes sense in that scenario. All right? Keeping all of these things in mind, you are expected to build a storyline जिसमें आपके general story elements incorporated. What are the general story elements? Narrative elements. Obviously, you should have a set limit of characters. Doesn't have to be too elaborate, but should be there. There should be a specific setting and a specific series of events taking place that are connected with one another. Now, some of you believe that memorizing a general plot may be an easy way out. The reason why this is not encouraged is because the first thing that the examiner will test or is looking for when they check your content is to see whether or not the content actually makes sense in terms of the given prompt. So at the end of the day, if you are writing a plot, if you come up with a plot that does not effectively use the prompt, that will reduce your content score. Okay, so the content will only be effective if the prompt is effectively used. And that won't be possible for every single plot that you memorize. So instead of doing that, the best way forward is to actually come up with a plot that is a simple day-to-day situation. That way, your events will actually make sense and you won't lose track of your overall content in terms of comprehension. So आपके जो flow of events होगी वो logical होगी फिर. So keep in mind that a simple plot is not a bad thing. So if you write a simple plot which is effective, you will actually maximize your score. So I hope that is something that clarifies this concern for all of you. Please keep in mind, simple plots are actually a good thing. Other than that, the biggest mistake that students are making is that they are not using their paragraphs for effect. They're not using a wide range of punctuation and sentence structures. So a lot of short sentences make your story boring and redundant. A lot of excessively long sentences might actually make it difficult for the examiner to follow your series of events. So in that regards, it's very important to try and keep in mind कि आपका जो plot है वो आप पहले plan out करो before you actually start writing. And another thing that the examiner reports talk about is abrupt endings. So if your storyline is not planned out before, you'll end up with an abrupt ending, which again will make your response ineffective. So these are points that I took out after reading the examiner reports. These are the mistakes students are making. They're not describing situations enough. So if they're describing an emotion, instead of, they just go on to say Alex was sad. So instead, describe what this person is feeling. What does it mean to feel sad and why? So these will actually drastically improve your overall response. Okay, so it's very important that you keep these things in mind when you start planning out your narrative essay. Most of you are familiar with these narrative elements. So I'm going to use this with these prompts. So I've put together all the prompts that have showed up so far. All right. So these are from the initial paper where they, number one, for example, ask you to write a story in which someone receives an unexpected telephone call with some exciting news. So they've set the entire scenario for you. In all of these cases, it is a very good idea to stick to a very everyday event. So it doesn't have to be something extremely unrealistic. If it's a telephone call reminding you or telling you that your tickets have been confirmed, or you have finally or you've applied for a visa and you've got it, something realistic. Or even if it is a telephone call from a friend that is calling you to tell you that, oh, my elder sister is getting married. So something very realistic. It's exciting, it's unexpected because it came out of nowhere, and it's very simple, something relatable. You will actually have more to say on a plot like that as opposed to a very crazy out of the box idea. Because again, this is not a creative writing paper, it's a language paper. They're testing your ability to use language effectively. So a simple plot might actually take you further ahead in terms of scores as opposed to a very crazy out of the box idea.
Ma'am,
Yes.
can we end the story with a cliffhanger, or is that considered an abrupt ending?
Okay, so I will answer that right now because it's a very good question that you just asked. Cliffhangers are not encouraged. The reason for that is you will have to be exceptionally good at storytelling to be able to maintain a cliffhanger at 450 words effectively. So it's not encouraged. So the only way that you can write a cliffhanger is if you do something. Sorry, can you repeat that?
Where would we write the outline of the story, the narrative one?
Sorry, the what for the story?
Outline of the story.
Okay, so you are asking me about planning the response?
Yes.
So you may use a few lines. Or you can actually use the space under the given prompts to do that.
On the paper with blue pen, or I have to write it with a pencil and then erase it.
Acha, okay, so the thing is, a lot of examination halls, because the guideline says that you're not allowed to carry any stationery that is not required for the paper, and technically you don't need a pencil for the English paper, they might not allow that within the hall. So if you're using your pen to say that this is your planning or your rough draft, and you just use a little bit of space under the questions to do so, that's fine. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right, no worries. Okay, so the first thing that I want you all to keep in mind is a simple plot is a good thing as long as it's used effectively. If you look at the second prompt, which is asking you to incorporate this sentence within the plot, it says, what do you mean you forgot? So there is obviously a hint of confusion and a hint of surprise and maybe even irritation within this statement itself. Because obviously something has happened that this person wasn't expecting and something was forgotten. Again, a very simple plot. For example, you are packing for a picnic. You were in charge of keeping the plates in the basket, your mom told you. And when you get there, your mom asks you to take out the plates from the basket. And you say, oh, I forgot. So a very simple plot like that may be more effective as opposed to building a very crazy scenario about someone forgetting to, pack weapons before going to war. Okay, so a realistic plot will be easier for you to build in this regard. All right, so that applies to all of these prompts. For example, if it says she felt a huge sense of joy when she saw her best friend running towards her. A simple scenario like you are waiting for your best friend at the airport. And in that moment, when she's running towards you, that extreme joy you feel. So building up to that moment, the excitement of seeing your best friend, going to pick her up, and then that moment when she's running towards you, that excitement. Simple, straightforward, but effective. That is what you want to aim for with your plots. This is the next set of paper and their examples. This is from October, November. So question number 5, write a story with in which a message was not given to the correct person. So for example, there's an emergency or your father who travels a lot for work has to go out of country or has to go out of the city on an emergency meeting. So he calls home and tells you to tell your mom about something. And instead of telling your mom, you end up telling somebody else. You tell your grandmother and then forget about it. So that confusion could obviously cause trouble. So इस तरह की छोटी everyday situations can actually help you stick to a plot that is effective. Similarly, it was clear that time was running out, and so we had to try something different. Could be a situation where you're all working for a group project in your classroom, and that
Ma'am, in
one
which way
thing,
could we effectively end our story?
Bache, the best way to effectively end your story would be to focus on the idea of how that event needs to come to a close. So obviously it's going to be different for every story,
Or
but
suppose, ma'am,
there
you
should be a
told
conclusion.
now
अगर for
that
example मैं इस question number 6 को लेती हूँ. For example, let's use question number 6 as an example to how to end this story. If I'm writing a story about a group of students who have to take part in a science competition जो उनकी क्लास में होना है, उन्होंने एक project बनाना है वहाँ पे. So for a few days they gather, they talk about the project that they're going to make. They designate every task to every member. So everybody has their own tasks. Somebody is supposed to bring the equipment, somebody is supposed to bring the chart paper, somebody is supposed to bring the batteries for the machine, all of those things. आपने वो decide कर लिया. And then on the day of the event, when you're actually trying to put together your project, you realize that the wire you have is not long enough. And no matter how hard, like how different you try to assemble it, you just cannot get it all to come together. And then it was clear that time was running out. So we had to try something different. And so we decided to let go of the wire altogether. So now effectively, then मैंने एक situation ऐसी set की where time is important, where they're trying to fix something or do something, but they can't manage. So now they have to try and go about it in a different way. And then I ended by talking about either they're going to make it or they won't be able to succeed in making that project. And I conclude by showing how they realize next time they should definitely have extra supplies. So that's a wrapped up situation, isn't it? Now it may look like a very, very simple plot. May even seem childish to you guys, but that's fine. Use a simple plot, but write it effectively. Incorporate metaphors, use effective language. Describe that panic that they feel in that moment. Yes, go ahead.
Basically, I am not good with my vocabulary, so I will do narrative writing, okay?
Okay.
But I haven't started descriptive narrative. So what can I do is I haven't have a time.
Sorry, can you repeat that? If you don't have time for narratives and you want to end it effectively, is that what you're saying?
No, basically I am saying that I don't have so much time as paper is on Monday, and I am neither starting to write on descriptive or narrative. As descriptive need vocabulary, and I am bad with my vocabulary.
So I
So
would suggest that A, you should definitely practice the past papers, the recent ones. And B, you should definitely read through the examiner's report. Read those samples.
okay,
All right.
okay.
Okay. Again, simple everyday plots will be more effective. So I'm sure something or the other you can talk about that happens in everyday life. For example, if you take question number 8.
Ma'am, you want
Gigi, go ahead. But did you have a question?
Ma'am, you wanna say that we should not use a long storyline.
You should not use an extremely complex storyline. That's what I'm trying to say. Because it won't be possible for you to keep track of all those events. So if you keep a very simple plot in mind, it will be easier for you to focus more on delivering that event effectively. One more thing that students end up doing is that they start off too many events and then they forget about what was happening. So if you, for example, start off talking about someone going on an adventure, so stick to that adventure. उस adventure के बीच में और events आप जितने डालते जाओगे, it will be difficult for you to keep track of those events. So a simple plot is actually easier to follow through and use better language for. All right?
But
Ma'am,
ma'am,
is it
अगर हम
Is it
Yes.
okay if we over dramatize that plot? Like if we're writing a very simple thing, but we make it sound as if it's like some really big heist or something?
Okay, so for example, if I say that it was clear the time was running out, so we had to try something different. So the panic of that situation, I can elaborate that as effectively as I want. Because for those children, that moment where they cannot get that project to work, for them, it's a matter of life and death. So I can explain it like that.
So it won't have an adverse impact on the writer.
No. So obviously, if I am trying to explain an emotion or a situation effectively, that's one thing. But if I'm talking about unnecessary details, if I keep talking about a mug which has no relevance to my plot whatsoever, and I keep describing how beautiful it is, obviously that is unnecessary use of words. But obviously, for example, with question number 6, the situation does depend on panic and anxiousness. So that anxiety, if I focus on how anxious they're feeling in that moment and how they're scrambling for a solution, that is not over dramatized. I am actually making it effective. So if it's something that I'm describing for effect, that's one thing. If I'm describing something for no effect whatsoever, I'm just going on and on and on about something that adds no, has no relevance to my plot, then that's a waste of words. Does that clarify your concern?
How should we plan narrative writing?
This is narrative writing that I'm talking about.
Miss, are we supposed to plan our entire plot based on the one sentence we are supposed to include in the story, or just add it anywhere by adding a context?
Okay, now listen, when you are given these prompts, the effectiveness of your response is actually how effectively this prompt was incorporated. So yes, your overall plot has to be something that is going to add to this. It is going to be based on the situation that that statement implies.
Okay, miss.
All right, so it can't just be one line in there for no effect.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Is the question will tell us what to like, in which perspective we have to write, like the first person or the third person?
Yes, if you look at the second and fourth question, it is saying, what do you mean you forgot? That means this person is directly addressing that other individual. It's first person. Whereas
Okay,
if you look
thank you.
at 4, it says she felt a huge sense of joy when she saw her best friend running towards her.
Yeah.
So can you guys please mute yourself if you're not speaking?
ma'am, can you explain question 1 that with
Write a
someone
story in
receives
which someone
the
receives an
telephone?
unexpected telephone call with some. All right, so a very simple straightforward prompt for a question like this would actually be, for example, me receiving a phone call from my best friend about her
Yes,
telling
I've
me that
got a
she's
question.
getting married. So very simple, very straightforward. Unexpected call, your friend who moved out of Pakistan. Beta, I'm going to answer your question once I'm done answering this one. So, for example, if you say, receive a call from your best friend who moved or was gone for, a trip, and unexpectedly gives you a call that, oh, by the way, I'm back. Let's go for coffee today. So that's an unexpected call, which is exciting news for you because you are excited to see your friend, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. Can we assume someone as ourselves?
Yeah, of course. So in this case, it is completely up to you. This is open to your perception.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Anyways, yes, Misha, you had a question? Any more questions for composition writing, for narrative writing in particular?
Ma'am, I want to ask, I wrote a story for question 4 in which a girl wins the talent show, and then after she wins, I included the sentence, she felt a huge sense of joy when she saw her best friend running towards her. So is that
Okay.
effective use of the prompt?
Not really, because why does it matter that the best friend is running towards her when the story is revolving around winning something?
So we have to make the story so that it revolves around the prompt.
Yes, obviously this has to be effective. So
Okay.
when think about it, when you win something, when you win a competition, in that moment, why is it an effective situation for your best friend to be running towards you?
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
if I said that I took part in this competition for the sake of my best friend who couldn't,
Yes.
that would be effective. So I did something to make her proud.
Okay.
So do you see how changing the same plot slightly makes a difference?
Yes.
So ye socho, is it effective?
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to ask that is descriptive writing, is choosing descriptive writing remarked as more since more people tend to write narrative?
If you choose descriptive or narrative, it completely depends on your comfort zone. Write what you are comfortable with, write what you're good at. There is no guideline that says description is graded more or narrative is graded more, because they both have their own set of marking schemes. और आप जो भी लिखोगे आपका उसी हिसाब से चेक किया जाएगा response. So you should write what you're comfortable with. Descriptive writing is something that comes easily to some students who have very good vocabulary and who are good at describing.
Ma'am?
So there is
Ma'am,
nothing wrong with choosing
the
I
descriptive.
want
plot
to
for
ask
story.
that whenever I do descriptive writing, like I've always wanted to do narrative writing and I can manage it well. But whenever I do descriptive writing comparatively, I get more marks. So what do you advise?
I would advise you do something that, okay, so when you come up with your, when the paper is in front of you, read all 4 prompts. This applies to everybody who's confused about whether they should choose descriptive or narrative. Read all 4 of the prompts. Think for 5 minutes what you would write for each of them. Choose the one where you have most content. So you may come across a descriptive essay or a prompt for descriptive writing that may be something that you're actually very closely associated with or familiar with. You never know. In that paper, it might be that description जो आपने खुद experience की हुई हो. So it'll be easier for you to describe. In that
Yeah,
case,
but
obviously,
I think I can get more marks in descriptive, but a
then choose
descriptive comes
descriptive.
which is very unrelatable to me and not I think I cannot do it as well as I've done the previous ones.
Then
So
go for
I
narrative.
should go.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
So basically, go for whatever you have more content for and you're more confident with. Don't choose something because you've already decided I'm better at descriptive or narrative. Do not walk into the
Okay,
examination hall
let's
with a
go to that
preset
one.
mind that I will write this, because you don't know the prompt. Read all 4 of them.
Ma'am, I have a question. Can you explain
Yes.
again cliffhangers, because my narrative is abrupt due to
Okay.
adding at the end.
All right. So Why do you think that happens?
To be honest, I don't know. My teacher
Okay, so
always.
all right. So look, with directed writing, if your response, for example, is in favor of the idea that um, you are going to say that my opinion is that social media should be banned, or yeah, okay, let's stick to that. That social media should be banned. Now, the bottom line here is that at the end of the day, if you believe that social media is something that is a distraction, is something that is keeping you away from being productive. So keep in mind that you are basically going to highlight how. So it doesn't matter if later on I'm going to say that social media should exist or should not exist. If it is a distraction, it is a distraction. So you will talk about how it is making students, it is denying students that ability to spend the right amount of time they require for being productive because they are unable to stop themselves from that distraction because आपने distraction उनके हाथ में लाके रख दी है. Does that make sense? Or do you want me to go about this with more examples?
Miss, more example.
Okay. अच्छा. Basically, अगर आपने एक point को develop करना है, you can do that positively, you can do that negatively. Let's look at this through a text. I think that'll be easier. For example, we have the point here that zoos are becoming a business. Do you agree with this idea or disagree with this?
I would
Do you agree that
disagree with this idea.
you disagree with the idea that zoos are becoming a business in this day and age?
Yes.
Okay, why? Give me a reason to support that when I'm saying that they are becoming a business because people are using them to earn money. Isn't that what
Yes.
a business does? So how is that a good thing? Is there anything you can say to convince me that a zoo may be a business, but it's still a good thing? Anything
No,
else?
it's not the good thing.
It's not a good thing that it's becoming a business?
Yes,
Why is it a bad thing?
because they only benefit for themselves,
Okay.
but not the animals living in the cage.
Exactly. So when I'm going to write this and I'm going to develop this in my text, I will talk about how in this day and age, everything is starting to become a business. And because of that, zoos are no different. And the fact that they are being monetized so much, monetize करने का मतलब क्या होता है? To turn something into something that gives you money. So when zoos are being monetized so excessively, because of that, it's the animals that suffer because their well-being is not being considered. अगर मैंने इसको उस तरह evaluate करना as a negative point, I will talk about how animal well-being is compromised. इसी चीज को मैं एक positive light में भी कह सकती हूँ. That because they're becoming a business, a lot of people who don't care about animals are still investing in zoos and towards animals just because of how lucrative it is. So a businessman will see that if I build a sanctuary, I take care of these animals, there will be so many people willing to pay a ticket, good business, and they'll be so happy because now I'm the person who's saving animals. So do you see how that can even be a good thing?
Yes.
It encourages people to take care of animals even though they do not care much for these animals. Because they see an opportunity to earn out of this as well. Does that clarify your concern?
Yes.
All right, I am going to be online for another 5 minutes. So any more questions about composition or directed writing that you guys may have? I see that Aroma, you've had your hand
There
raised for
are
quite some time. जी बेटा बताइए.
Ma'am, there are various plots that we can choose while writing narrative writing. For suppose that I recently wrote an story which involves the sentence that we excitedly opened the door. So I just, you say, set the plot in an adventurous land in which
Okay.
there was a tiger involved, and suddenly the tiger escaped from the cage, but accordingly the team arrived and the problem was solved. So it is a sort of like simple plot, or I have complicated this one?
You have complicated it way too much because now the effectiveness of that door and the excitement associated with opening that door is not effective anymore. It's more focused on that suspense, that adventure. So a simple plot would have been a family opening the door to their new home. Wouldn't that be more effective, or a group of students going to a new class together?
So we have to set our story according to the sentence, and we have
Yes.
to put
Yeah.
the events throughout whole according to the sentence.
Yes, that would be effective use of the prompt, yes. I do want to go over a few guidelines for descriptive writing before we move on with any more questions, because all those students who are choosing or would be more inclined towards descriptive writing, there are only certain guidelines that you need to keep in mind, because as far as descriptive elements are concerned, there aren't that many. So when we talk about descriptive writing, there are 2-3 things that you can keep in mind that can improve your response. So basically the idea here is that jab bhi aap, in case you end up choosing descriptive writing, the first thing that you're going to try and incorporate is going to be the fact that your overall response should incorporate a certain level of visual details, right? So you have to try and create an image with words. So this is basically how you can simplify that effectiveness. The photograph method is something that is very effective. So if you try and imagine that particular situation or that particular scene or that particular place or even that particular person that you're describing in front of you as an image, and then pick one point and then move from there. This will help you eliminate narrative elements within your description. A description is only describing what you see, hear, feel, smell, or even taste in that scenario, and that's it. So I don't need to know how you got there, what happened at home before you reached that park. None of that matters. Whenever you're writing a descriptive essay, you have to keep in mind that you're just describing what's in front of you and that's it. Does that clarify something in terms of this concern? Like, why is descriptive different from narrative? Because that was a question in the chat. So you have to keep in mind that जब भी आप descriptive writing लिख रहे हो, try to focus on simple image description. Take that image and describe that one by one. Okay, any more questions for descriptive writing?
Miss, I
Ma'am,
had a question related to narrative writing.
All right, sure, go ahead.
What if we cannot think of a simple plot which can effectively emphasize on the sentence we're supposed to include? So in that case, can we write a more complicated plot?
All right, so when you are talking about a simple plot, a simple plot means everyday events. So I'm sure something in your day, in your life, in the lives of those around you would be something associated with the plot. So a complex plot is actually more difficult to come up with, isn't it?
Can we consider kidnapping as a
ma'am,
simple
if we
plot?
use a simple story, it will be difficult to create a climax.
But that's the thing. You are not writing a story that has, okay, you have 450 words. So building a climax is not, I agree if an interesting plot is something that you can do justice to within 450 words, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm saying the simple way to go about it would be to pick a simple plot. Because at the end of the day, your task is to use this prompt effectively. अब आप वो kidnapping के through करते हो या फिर, for example, okay, let's just a second. What do you mean you forgot? Two people plan to kidnap someone because they need ransom money. They're desperate for money. And so they decide to kidnap someone. And right at the moment when one of the partners says to the other, bring out the phone, let's make the call for the ransom. And he said, oh, wait, I forgot to bring it. Do you see how effective that phone would have been in that scenario? And this person forgetting that phone puts them in a very difficult situation. Although that may not be a simple plot, but if written effectively, it uses this prompt effectively, and that's fine. So again, I'm not saying it's a bad idea to use a good complex plot. I'm just saying make sure you use a plot that you can do justice to within this word limit. In most cases, a simple plot does go far because in that case, आप एक coherent story लिख पाते हो. Okay?
All right, Miss.
Okay. Yeah.
Miss, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Miss, when we are describing a character, I find it very difficult to naturally include the senses like smell, taste, and hearing. How would you advise to work on this?
Okay, so when you are describing a character, so with hearing, obviously you might want to describe the way this person walks or what it sounds like when they speak. So incorporating sounds in a description for a character could even be of how there is a very peculiar rustling sound that their jacket makes every time they walk, leaving observers with the mystery of why. So slight descriptions like that might be incorporated. Obviously, sounds are more effective for scenes. For example, there was a question for descriptive writing, where they asked you to describe a theme park or attraction before it opens. When it is open and when it is closed. So is description mein, the sound element will be very, very prominent because you will be describing the sounds you hear when it's open. Obviously, it's going to be very chaotic. So there's going to be a huge combination of sounds that you would hear. From the laughter of children to the argument of the group of teenagers about which ride to take next, to the crying of the little girl who has just dropped her ice cream. So all of those sounds with that consistent background of machinery running and the screams of the children high on adrenaline going over the roller coaster, going through the roller coaster ride. So all of those sounds will be playing. And then when it's closed, obviously it is going to be silent. It's going to be less, it's obviously not crowded anymore. All the sounds, either it's going to be completely empty when it's closed, so there's nothing you can hear other than the rustling of the wind and leaves, or how those swings chatter with one another when the wind causes them to move slightly. Maybe there's a sweeper in one corner brushing away all the trash that reflects on the busyness of the day. So these would be the sounds, and that's it. Similarly, agar smells ki baat aap karte, to when a theme park is open, so you smell popcorn, there's fresh cotton candy, there's the smell of fuel from the generators running at the far end. So all of those sounds and smells will come together when it's open as opposed to when it's closed. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
Ma'am,
Yes.
मुझे ना like a more complex storyline just come to me naturally, and I'm like मेरे word limit भी पूरी हो जाती है and climax and like all the narrative elements and everything. So is that okay? Should I just stick with that?
You stick to that as long as you're using the prompt effectively.
Okay.
Okay. So the first thing that you need to keep in mind is content will be judged on whether or not you use the question
And
as
ma'am,
effectively.
what about the plot setting for narrative story? Like, do we have to describe a little bit of our surroundings, or do we have to
Yes,
directly
that's
go to
actually
the
a good idea.
storyline?
For that, I would suggest it would be a good idea for you to go back to I will share this with you in the group as well. इसमें जो narrative response है, if you guys read that, this is the examiner report. And if you read the opening that they've given for the narrative question, you'll notice that they've actually started off with a little bit of a description of what's going on outside. Just a second. And that's actually very effective. Look at that. The sun shine, obviously spelling mistake, profusely as blades of light hit the rickety chair, the birds chirped, while one sat on the windowsill drinking water from a pot of clay placed there. So just a little bit of a setting to describe what this place is like. Does that make sense? So just describing where this person is and what kind of
Ma'am,
situation this
अगर
is, it's a
जो
good idea. Yeah.
And when we are describing the climax, do we have to include descriptive words to more efficiently deliver the idea?
Of course, if you're okay, so whenever you're describing emotions, whenever you're describing a situation, even when you describe a character, what they look like, that's fine. Keep in mind, narrative features जो होते हैं ना, उसमें description भी होती है. So describing an emotion, describing a situation or an action, or even a character is part of narrative elements. So instead of just saying that Alex was sad, if I say that tears rolled down her eyes as she looked through that letter, I'm still saying that she's sad, but I'm doing so in a more visual manner. And that's fine. That's actually a good thing.
What would suggest that हमें कितने characters include करने चाहिए अपनी story?
But keep it simple. Don't go on with 10, 20 characters. Obviously, that's too much. It would be very difficult to... Okay, do not incorporate characters जिनकी कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है आपकी story में. So अगर 2 characters पे भी आपका एक event effectively portray कर सकता है एक prompt को, go ahead and do that. So make sure that your characters are actually there for effect, not because you had names you wanted to use for characters. So the character it's again a narrative feature. So unnecessary use of characters, unnecessary settings, unnecessary events are obviously a waste of words. And again, you only have 450 words.
Ma'am?
Yes.
We talk about like word limit को exceed करना, लेकिन हम word limit से कितना नीचे लिख सकते हैं?
बेटा 350 से कम तो आपने लिखना नहीं है. 350 to 450 is your word limit. So if you're writing till 400 to 420 words, then that's an effective storyline.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask about the cliffhanger and about how, like, ending. I always end my narratives through a cliffhanger, and I've been using I've been using a very simple plot as you suggested. Like, I started with a very simple plot I have, like some natural going through a street and everything, and then I end up with a cliffhanger. So, is it a very effective narrative technique?
All right. So you need to make sure that your ending does not seem abrupt in that regard. So if you are ending towards, or leaning towards a cliffhanger, it has to be for effect. Again, I will go on to say cliffhangers are not encouraged because it's not possible to, like, you'll have to be very good at hinting towards that, and it has to be for effect.
What do you mean by abrupt? Like, can you explain?
Okay, so if the ending leaves the examiner with question marks, that's an abrupt ending.
Ma'am,
Yes.
can we end things? I usually end my narratives in a way that, like, if the main character is hurt and she closes her eyes or she like faints out, it ends there. Is it
no,
okay?
that's fine. But
Okay,
again, that depends on the plot.
yeah, in certain plots where
Yes.
if like
So for
suppose that
example,
the
if the
character
plot is
gets
talking
hurt and
about
then she
how
just
someone is really excited to see their best friend, that story ending with this person on the floor fainting may not be effective.
yeah, no, in like certain stories.
So just keep that in mind. As long as it's in accordance to the plot.
And ma'am, what if I end up like the cliffhanger by using a flashback? I usually include a character, and they usually faint, and then the flashback. So it basically doesn't comes in abrupt ending. Like, I include a flashback at the end.
Yeah, technically that's fine.
Okay, ma'am.
I think we have had quite a long session here. So I'm going to call it a day. Yes, I think this will be the last question then. Go ahead, Beta.
मुझे ना एक्चुअली प्रॉब्लम होती है मेरी नैरेटिव को एंड करने में. मैं स्टार्ट कर लेती हूँ, मैं लाइक मिडिल पैराग्राफ लिख लेती हूँ, लेकिन मुझे एंड करने में बहुत ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम आती है कि मैं उसको एंड कैसे करूँ. तो मैं क्या चीज़ इम्प्रूव करूँ, कैसे वो बेटर हो जाए.
Okay, so I would suggest read these prompts that I'm sharing with you because this will help you understand what an ending is supposed to actually look like. Obviously, every plot will have their own end that you can associate with them. So it will be different for every plot. But just keep in mind that whatever event that you're highlighting within that plot, there should be a conclusion to it. You should, like, for example, if a situation is taking place, there should be a conclusion to it. So even if it's a positive plot, for example, if the plot focuses on two best friends coming together or meeting, and that line where it says she was overjoyed when she saw her best friend running towards her. So if you end on a plot how these two best friends are seen walking hand in hand, headed home, talking about all the fun that they're going to have now that they're together, that's an effective end. So
Like
just
for
make sure,
example,
yeah.
एक स्टोरी है उसमें मैंने लिखा था कि स्कॉलरशिप लेटर उसको ऑफर हुआ था लेकिन उसकी डेडलाइन फॉर एग्जांपल आज है और वो अपना एनवेलप लेके जाता है ऑफिस में और व्हेन ही ओपन्स इट उसमें नहीं होता उसका लेटर। तो उसके बाद मैंने उसके इमोशंस डिस्क्राइब किए उसके क्या थे लेकिन मुझे एंड करना नहीं समझ आ रहा था कि मैं किस
What
तरह
was the
करूँ।
question for this plot?
Where he lost something priceless and it was at the worst possible moment.
So obviously you will highlight the fact that the anxiousness is because this letter was needed. This person doesn't have a lot of time to do anything about it. So obviously your conclusion would be that you will end on a note that this person tries to do everything they can to rectify this issue, but because there isn't enough time for them to actually reach out to the office or anything like that, so this person ends up sitting there dismayed because now, since time has run out, they've lost a very important opportunity because of it. So obviously you're ending at that note where this person has now faced the consequence of this.
All right, thank you.
Ma'am,
Right?
can I ask one
Okay.
last question?
Okay, this will literally be the last question. I'm sorry, you guys, but this will be the last question. Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So in directed, if there are two texts, right? Text A and text B, possibly of advantages and disadvantages. So if
Okay.
I find in the text A, if it is of advantages, I find one advantage not so appealing. So can I counter it and I can evaluate it by writing in my prompt to be as an advantage as a disadvantage, or I cannot do that.
You can, of course, you can. Okay, you can always evaluate a point in a negative light if that's what you believe. So for example,
Okay.
if someone continues to say, if the text says that, okay, a zoo is the best way to protect an animal, but you disagree with that, you can provide alternatives to say that XYZ method is even more effective.
So
Again, that would be something you added to something that was already, and you obviously continue to that this is what people believe. That's
सो
fine.
हम ऐसा नहीं कर सकते हम टेक्स्ट ए लिखें फिर टेक्स्ट बी लिखें
No, no,
ये
that's fine, Beta, that's fine. Why would
ओके
you again, I'm going to end on this note. Do not mention text A, text B in your response.
Yeah.
So again, if that's what you were saying, please don't do that. You are
No,
not supposed to refer to the text in your response.
I mean to write the to evaluate text A first and then evaluate text B first last.
Again, I will say you can evaluate point of view 1 first and then point of view 2 first, second. Because you really need text A, text B, you know, you
Okay.
might want to do B first.
Yeah, I
It's
get
all
it.
about point of view.
Okay, I get it.
All right. I think that was a fruitful session. I will be posting all the documents that I talked about during the session within the group. And yeah. All right. So I hope this was helpful. I will add all these documents there. So if anything is not shared by the end of the day, you can send a reminder and I'll make sure that it's shared with you guys. All right. So I hope the session was fruitful. Good luck for your paper. Please make sure you read through the examiner's report before your exam and look at the comments so that you know exactly where you're going wrong. I will end on the same note. Word limits are very important. Read the question very carefully. Make sure that you understand the question and plan out your response before you actually start writing. All right. So on that note, good luck to all of you. And I hope everyone succeeds in this paper. And I hope this was a useful session for you guys. All right. Thank you so much.
Allah Hafiz, ma'am.
Allah Hafiz. Thank you so much for being here. Allah Hafiz.